Hello everyone. Today we're going to build a complete authentication and payment system using Voiceflow. We will create a secure system that can verify emails, phone numbers, can handle two-factor authentication, can generate Stripe payment links. By the end of this tutorial, you have a professional grade verification system ready to use in your Voiceflow project. So the practical application of this project is that you're able to do user registration systems. Agencies can also use it for newsletter subscriptions because you may want to have a clean email list for marketing. You could also use this to verify businesses for B2B applications in your lead generation build. As well as for customer support, you can do two-factor authentication, and this is mainly helpful when you are doing or you want an increased or enhanced security for your user account. The password authentication system also helps to provide or protect user data and privacy, as well as the main contribution of this is to look at the e-commerce. So this Stripe integration or the ability to generate payment links can be very useful for e-commerce, as well as subscription services, your digital products, service booking, and fundraising. So there are a whole lot of areas you could use part of this project for. So assuming you are an AI agency and what you're trying to do is you're trying to sell an AI course. Someone lands on your page and then lands on your chatbot. They put in various like their name, their first name, their last name, their email, their phone number, and the cost of it. And this is supposed to generate a Stripe payment link. So how do we do this? First of all, we need a Voiceflow account. We also need Stripe for payment processing. We also need make.com for automations. We need Airtable for managing of the data. We also need Numverify for phone verification and zero bounds for email verification. We'll look into these APIs very soon. So for email, I built a function using the zero bounds API. So the only inputs that you need is the API key and the email address that you collect at this particular stage. This is just a brief description of what it does. So it validates email addresses and provides various characteristics about the validity. So with this code, it also has a regular expression which first extracts the email from a text. If there is no email or it's an empty space, it will tell you that provide a valid email address. That means that it's not going to use your APIs unless there's actually an email that looks like an email, or at least in the pattern of an email. Once that is done, then it goes ahead to validate the email using the zero bounds API. So when you go to the zero bounds API, there are various statuses. So zero bounds API has various statuses. Usually what you're looking out for is the valid. So anything on the valid, you want it. And anything about abuse, you also want it, because abuse emails are not necessarily invalid emails. They are emails that they were given an opportunity in an email to unsubscribe, but they went ahead to click that this email is a spam. In that situation, when that particular email address keep doing that to emails, it's tagged as abuse because it's abusing the spam button. But that does not necessarily mean that you don't want that person. It could be your friend. People have the tendency to do that at times. The next that we have is the catch-all. So catch-all here is that sometimes it's impossible to validate without sending a real email and waiting for a bounce. So these emails are classified as still valid for most of our chatbot builds. We also have the unknown. So in the unknown, from the various builds that I've done, I've noticed that the relevant ones is the gray listed. So the gray listed ones under the unknown, you can allow them. The rest you can ignore. We also have the do not mail. So in do not mail, these emails, you could have the row based as valid. You could also have something like the row based catch all. So row based emails sometimes use info, sales, and sometimes these emails, or they're actually valid emails. Some of my clients use sales at, info at. So these are all valid emails and they should be allowed. So this and this should be allowed. The rest, I don't think you need them, depending on your use case. But the ones I'm mentioning are the most often use case. So those are the ones here. And then the sub statuses for these ones are also there. So there are three parts here. And then these are the values. So the messages that are going to be shown are these ones. If an email is valid, it will also show this message. So let's go to zero bounce. So the zero bounce API, you need an API key. So we copy the API key and then we bring it here. So the API, you have to create these variables. You create them in your own Voiceflow. So we go to the variables, you click here, you just paste it here because we would use it. So when we are testing it, we going to unlink this and then test it. So these are the output: extracted email, extracted validation email, validation message, and email is valid, which can be true or false. So let's do an example here. So you put this email here. Let's see what it does. It says it's valid. What about we also put this here and then we type in anything. Okay, that's good. The next thing is that we want to just put a space so it knows that there is no email. What about a wrong email? Okay, that's good. So now we've been able to have this validation. So we take the extracted email and use it in the next flow. So the next is that we ask the person for their phone number, and we ask that the person do it with international number starting first. So we store that particular number here, and then we have the phone validation function using the Numverify API. So with this function, it validates international phone numbers and API using the API. You have to include the country code as a prefix, and this is the API key for Numverify. So let's look a bit about what Numverify does. So this is Numverify, and it's able to validate phone numbers from 232 countries, which is very good. So we go ahead to get the API key from Numverify, which is this one. We get that, and then the next thing we come to the flow, and then we have a variable here. This one. So we paste it here. go back to the flow and then we test how it works. So let's connect the valid path to this. The next is that we want to enter any phone number to test this. So you put in this phone number to see what happens. Okay, so let's try this phone number with a bit of words. Okay, that's good. The next thing is let's use a phone number from France. What about a wrong phone number? It knows that the phone number is wrong, then let's try space. Also it's wrong. Let's use a correct phone number. That's good. So you can see here that there are a couple of countries that Numverify is able to really verify. That's 232. So the next is that we try and continue on what we're doing. So we have a confirmation page here where the user confirms their first name, their last name, the extracted email, the formatted international number. So let's try and go through the whole flow. Okay, so the next is we go ahead to verify or click on whichever matters. So we can see here that the formatted international number is the same number here, this one. So we are picking the number there. The next thing is once we've been able to show this, the user confirms that yes, that information is correct. And now the main fee is actually $5, but there is a discount code. So if the person has a discount code, they go through this part. If they don't, then they have to pay the $5. So let's say they have a discount code. If they have a discount code, they enter the discount code at this particular portion. And then what we are doing is we have a conditional block checking that the discount code is correct or not. So the discount codes that we have is VF10 and VF60. VF10 gives you 10% off and VF60 gives you 60% off. So 60% will give you 2 and 10% off the 5 will give you 4.5. The next thing is that we have another variable here called discount percent, and then we just put in the percent that we took off and the percent that we took off here. We are doing this because we want to show different messages to the user. If the person does not have a discount code, they are shown this generic message. But if they have a discount code, we tell them, awesome, your discount code for 10% has been successfully applied. Your price is 4.5, like that. Let's see how it works. So let's say I have a discount code of 60% off VF60. So now we have this information. So these are the items that we are going to use to generate the invoice. So we have the name, both first and last. We also have the email address, the phone number, and the price. So we're going to generate something like that. So we need to first create a make.com webhook. And in the make.com webhook, we are sending the information that we've collected. And then we get back. So we send the information via make.com. We post it into Airtable, and then we extract the ID of the Airtable. I'll show you the reason why we need this ID. So let's go to make.com. So the first thing is, in Stripe, we need to create the invoice items, or at least for this build. So here we want to create the invoice items. So the webhook, we create a webhook, and then we create a record in Airtable. So this is the email, the first name, the last name, the phone number, and the price. We are going to put this into the Airtable. And then once you have that into the Airtable, you then get back the response. So this is what we have here. This is the Airtable ID. So let's see what is in the Airtable. Recognize the last one is 02L. So let's see. So you see 02L. So in Airtable, each row has an identifier or an ID. In order to see it, you need to type record-ID and then bring this bracket. That will give you the ID. So it gives you this ID. Usually they are hidden, but you'd have to create them. When you do the formula work, it will generate it. So yeah, I guess you know how to do that. You click on formula. Once you click on that, it will generate it. And then you type in this. So the next is that we go back to Voiceflow, and then we have copied our webhook. So the webhook, I named it make.com webhook items. So once we copy the webhook in make here, we copy the webhook, we come back to Voiceflow and paste it. You create a variable and paste it. So I created a variable and I pasted it here. So I found this was a bit easier to use by just pasting it there and a bit more secure. Or you could use the secrets option that Voiceflow provides. So this is the same webhook. You can click on send, and then you notice that it would generate this here. So let's just run this for once. You can see that it came true, right? And you can see that it extracted the ID in the Airtable. So this is the ID. The DM here. So usually these are not there. So we will see how this came there. So when you run that part of the automation, when you run this, what you get is the email, this name, and then the phone number. We talk about how you got to generate. So now we've been able to get back the ID for that particular user. So it's assumed that the user is currently in the chatbot and we've gotten this ID. So when you get the ID, what we did was to save it as a Stripe ID. So you type in the Stripe ID and then you save it as that here. The next part of this is that you did a post request, right? So how did all this information come here? With just that single click, we've been able to generate the invoice. So we have the name, we have a bit of description here. We will show how we got this. And then once the user pays, that also comes. But let's see how we generated this invoice. So this whole thing initiated the flow. And then because now we've been able to collect the ID, we've been able to collect this ID here. We can use it anywhere. So let's go to make.com and then we go to this flow here. So this flow is what sends the invoice. But remember, this flow is being initiated by the airtable, by this webhook. So you see this webhook starts with 4JW, that you copy that, we are going to use it elsewhere. So when you go back to here, we click on automation, and then we have generate here. This generates is what starts the whole flow, what is going to initiate the whole flow. So we click on automations, and then what we are saying here is that when a record matches this, so when a record matches that, so the name of the table is called payment. So you can see here payment, so that's the name of the table. And then if it matches generates, then it's going to initiate that flow. So we will show how this word generates comes in. Is in the make.com. So once we do the post request from the chatbot here, and then this is being initiated, there is some part of this that we have the word generate. So let's go back to the airtable. So after this word generate is being put there, you can do a test, and there are a lot of words that we have generate. You can choose any of them. So it runs and is successful. And these are the values for that one that we picked. So the next is that we want to now trigger this webhook. How do we trigger the webhook to start to generate? You run a script. So you edit the script here. You remember we copied this address here to the clipboard. You come back to your airtable and then you paste it up to here. This record ID is a constant, you don't need to change it. This my record must be the same as the name here because you want to pick a record. And this my record here is one of the information or columns in that airtable. And that is where you would see that particular airtable ID or record ID. So this is the record ID. So my record. This is the same thing here. So once we have this and the generate starts, so once the generate hits the flow, it will run the script, and then that would trigger this flow. So the generate is at this part, right? So in the first part where we are creating the items, that is where the generate is. So you get this here. So this is where the generate is. So once this word hits the airtable here, this one, it now starts the automation. It runs the script. So when a record matches the condition, it runs the script. So now that we are able to run this particular script to initiate the make.com, the next is that we come back to this particular flow. So at this point, we know that the generate has hit the airtable, and then we're about to generate the invoice. So always what you have to do is try to run each of the models, each of them. So for instance, let's unlink this one, and let's run it once. And let's go to the airtable. Let's just play around with some information. And then we can see that in airtable, it will be generated. Yes. So in airtable, you can see here that a new record was created. Here, this is it. This new record was created with the generate here. And because the other flow was unlinked, nothing really happened. So always you try to run it, see what is coming out of the results, and then you connect it. And the next thing is that we want to now create a customer. So in Stripe, we need to create a customer. So you have to get your Stripe API key. To get your Stripe API key, because you need the API key at this particular section. So we need to create a Stripe API key, and then we place that API key here. You can get the API key from this section. So in Stripe, you go to developers, you go to create a restricted key. We are providing this key to make.com. So make, and then this is the address for make. So usually there is a two-factor authentication if you set it up. Okay, so now you copy this one and put it somewhere. You copy this. You're going to use this in make.com. But you have to come here first. And then when you come here, you try to give a lot of permissions to the Stripe. You give it a lot of permissions. Try to give it a lot of permissions. Yeah. So once you're done, now you've already copied this. So let's go to the make.com. So you add and you paste that information as mentioned. You paste it here. So once you paste it there, you then bring in this email that we have. We bring in the first and last names, and then you bring in also the phone number here. So those are the things you need to create a customer. Now, after creating a customer, you need to create an invoice item. To create an invoice item, now we are bringing in this create a customer, because you've created a customer here. You have now the ID here, and then you select total amount at this part, and then Stripe charges in cents. So what you do is that you use one of these multipliers, this one, this operator. You click on that, then you multiply the price that you got from Airtable, this price, you multiply it by 100, and then we are charging in Australian dollars. And then you can put a bit of description there. So remember we have this description here. Okay, this is paid. So this description here, right, that is what we're trying to create. So we have that description there as this one. Sorry, that description is what appears here. Yeah, this is the description. Yeah, so the description that we have in here, this part, it will appear here. So we will see where this comes from later on. So the next thing is, once we have this description, we go ahead to now create an invoice. So this is the step-by-step process. And then we also have the client ID, so the customer ID. So it's the same ID that we put it there. And then what do we want to do? We want to send an invoice, right? But if we are going to charge automatically, more like a subscription or that kind of thing, then we would have used this. So we're going to use send invoice because we're just doing a one-time payment. And then how many days do we want this to be? We want it to be due in 5 days. So when the user gets this invoice, it will be due in 5 days. So this is where that information I mentioned is. So you can put in that information there. And the next is that this is not needed, but this is some metadata. If you want, you could put in it like the record ID or something there. It helps if you have a lot of different payment and you're trying to use some metadata to filter them out. So you create that particular invoice. After creating the invoice, you have to finalize a draft invoice. To finalize a draft invoice, you need the invoice ID. So this is the invoice ID. And then you continue. So the next stage is now you want to be able to have the ability to send this by email. So you'd have to type this and then you insert the invoice ID at that particular stage. And then you'd have to also use a post request here. The content type is that, and feel free to type this as well. So that part is what is going to send the email. So for instance, this email was sent because of that API. And then the person can pay. So after the person has paid, you want to be able to update this airtable. You want to be able to update the airtable that the person has paid, right? You want to update this with something like paid. So you come into the base, the table, and the record ID. So you already have this record ID from the webhook here. And you can see that this record ID is actually the same as this airtable ID because you did an API call to retrieve it back in the response. So it's the same information here. And that is the same information here as well. This one. So what we are doing is that we already have the email. We have the first name, the last name. We have also generate in there phone number, the price. So we don't need to fill any other thing. The only thing we need to fill is the Stripe ID or the customer ID, and also the invoice ID and the URL. So the URL is this one. And that is what you want to bring back into Voiceflow. Right. So that is why you want to bring it to Voiceflow. And this is the invoice number. So this is why we are updating the airtable with. So this is it here. The Stripe ID, the invoice ID, and the URL. So that is the URL, and then the invoice number. And these are the phone numbers that we've collected. Okay. So now that we've been able to collect the URL, let's go back to Voiceflow. So we want to be able to get this particular URL. So how do we get the URL? So for instance, we know that the airtable curl is something like that. And we got this from here because the main idea of what we're trying to do here is we are trying to do a get. We are trying to retrieve something, a record. So we're trying to retrieve the URL, the invoice payment link. So to retrieve a record, but when we are retrieving the record, we are filtering it, so there is a list here. So this is exactly what we used, and that is what we are putting into here. The next is also the Stripe airtable ID. So let's pick some of that here. So this one, let's pick the last one. Okay, let's pick this one. so that in case if you get an error, you know that it's still going to work when you connect it. So we can see here that we got the values here. So we've been able to extract that particular value, and then using the new API step that Voiceflow built, we could now store this invoice, right? So this invoice URL, we can store it. So for me, I store it in Airtable hosted invoice URL, which is this. And then I also store the Airtable email, the email that was used, which is this one. So I store it in this variable. So that is that email. The next part of this is, now that we've been able to extract the URL, you just have to show it, right? You just have to show it. But sometimes it takes a bit of time for this URL to appear. So we are going to loop through this particular condition whilst it's getting the URL. So for instance, we do the get request. So once we do the get request and this Airtable variable containing the invoice URL is empty, then we are going to go back to this. So try getting if it's empty. If it's empty, if it's not empty, then you show it here. So let's try and do a test run of what I mean. So we've taken this, so at this point we click on generate. So this is going to make the post request with the name, the email, the price, and the phone number to Airtable. And then Airtable would also initiate the webhook, the JavaScript, the scripts that we did when the generate hits it. And then that initiates the make.com flow, and then it shows the invoice. So you can see here that it was looping. It was looping through this. It was looping because it takes a bit of time. It loops. Then once it loops through the block, and it gets the URL, or whenever it's ready, because it takes time for the invoice to be created. So we can see here that this is the invoice. Right, so this is the invoice. So let's go to Airtable and see what is happening in Airtable for 4.5. So you can see the 4.5 here. You can see the record there. And also, remember we did this automation. So this automation means that it's going to send the user an email copy in this API step. an email copy in this API step. So this is what sends the email. So we can see that in here we have that 4.0 there, and the message that we did was there. So the next is that we've been able to generate the invoice, right? The question is, if somebody pays, how do you know that a person has paid the invoice for you to continue? So we've been able to generate the invoice. The next thing is that we have this flow where we check in if the person has paid, right? So let's say we've shown the URL to the user, the client, and they claim they have paid. So once they have paid, the next thing is that we ask them, have you paid? If they have paid, what they do is that they go through this part. So in this particular flow, what you're trying to do is you're trying to see if the person has paid indeed or they have not paid. And what we want to do is that if they have paid, we want to get that payment status. So the payment status is this particular column. So we are looking for the word paid, right? That the person has paid. And also we want to confirm that this email is the same email that the person entered in the chatbot. So the email in the airtable, this email is what I'm referring to. So afterwards, we store that variable into them. So we do the get request, and then we are able to get the values, and then we store them. So we store the payment. So let's try and get this instead. Let's get this one. Let's get this ID here. So let's do another request. So we got the ID here. So within the ID, we have this email, and then we have all the information there which you could use. So the next is that we are checking if the person have paid. So we brought in the payment status, whether the person have paid or not. So how do we know that the person has paid? Now we have to go back to the flow. So in the flow, in this particular place, we have watching for Stripe payment. So when you're watching for Stripe payments, the same way you add your API, but there's something I do like to show you. Let me try. So one of the things that we want to see, so let's say we are beginning the connection, right? Because you have to pick the right group. So I have my API key for Stripe. I'm trying to do this new so that you see what I'm talking about. So the one we are looking for is invoice. And you're looking for whether the invoice has been paid, because you're looking for that successful payment of the invoice. So that's the one we select. And then once you select that, you save it. And then once you select that, okay, it's saying that I need to do that. Okay, so let's try and connect it. Let's put a key there. Let's save it. And then we click on invoice paid. So that's basically what you looking for, or what some of you may be looking for, and then you save it. So this is watching for any payment, right? It's watching for any payment. So remember we have this here. Let me try and do a payment of this, but let me take it offline, and then let me come back to the voice here, and then let me just disconnect. Okay, let me just let this play. So let's run this. I'm going to do the payment here. So I'm doing the payment somewhere else. So you can see that it came through, right? So when it came through, we can see here that we have the word paid. It just came in, right? So let's see how this came in there. So now we've been able to do the payment for the 4.5, and then the next thing is that we want to now be able to search the customer ID in the airtable, because we want to make sure that this payment is actually connected to this particular customer or invoice. Because remember that this API, the API key that we generated, actually is for the whole Stripe, right? So you may end up getting different payments that are coming through that are not necessarily for that particular invoice, right? So you want to make sure that you are getting the right invoice being paid. So that's what we're trying to check for. So we are checking the airtable to make sure that the Stripe ID, the invoice ID, those are the things we are searching for. And we are searching for the customer ID. So the customer ID is this one here. Is the same value that we have here. Here. These ones are the customer ID, but I labeled it as Stripe ID, but it's customer ID. So those are the ones you're checking for. And then you want to make sure that the information that is coming from Stripe is the same information that you have in your airtable. So we are checking that the Stripe ID is the same as the customer ID. So this information, the last one, GRL, is the same as this GRL, right? So they should be the same. That's what we are searching for. So that's what we are filtering the airtable for. So afterwards, so you can basically it's going to find just one thing, because but you can put a limit of 5, but it's going to find just one because these IDs are very unique unless you intentionally duplicate them. So the next thing is that we now have to put a filter here. The filter here is double checking to make sure that the information that has been written in that you've collected is actually the same. So when you click on it, what you are saying is that the customer ID or the Stripe ID in Airtable, you see this should be the same as the customer ID. This is different because remember we just did the flow to a certain point. So this is going to be like that. It's going to be different. But when we actually make a payment, or when we actually go to the flow, or if I had done the saving, you would have seen it. So let's try and make sure that this is the same so that it doesn't confuse people. So what we're going to do is that we're going to get one of the $2 payments. So one of them is this one, I think. Okay, so with this $2 payment, this is called PWDM. Let me just make a payment here on the side. Just a minute. Yes, so it should come through. So we can see that it's creating. Let's see the airtable. Yeah, so this is the payment we just made. So when you come here, we can see the values in there for the Stripe ID, X5. We can also see what is coming from the Stripe as X5. Yeah. So what we are basically trying to do here is that we're trying to filter the payments that are coming through to make sure that the Stripe ID that is coming from Stripe is the same, the customer ID that is coming from Stripe is the same as what is coming from Voiceflow, the airtable. Also the invoice ID that we have is the same. So for instance, this is the invoice ID. So this invoice ID in the airtable here should be the same as what is coming from Stripe. That's what we're just trying to confirm. And then we pass that information to the airtable, the information with the status. So this status is what we're trying to collect, the word paid. This status, this word status paid, that is what we are trying to extract. So that is why we're trying to extract to fill this part. So I think now we pretty know how to put all this information into. And remember, this is the ID we are trying to filter. So we are trying to filter the airtable ID, and then so this is the airtable ID. You all know that. That's why we're trying to filter, and then we update it with that record information. So the next thing in the flow is that we want to also be able to, now that let's say you've confirmed that the user have paid, that is going to go through this particular route. And then when it gets to this route, what we're doing is we're trying to create a password using random numbers. But we are not using any characters here because we are going to paste the password, an aggregate password, character password into Airtable. We want to do that because if somebody has paid and they are coming back to the chatbot, let's say they had an internet connection, sometimes you want to verify them. So this two-factor really helps. And then you send them an email. But when you send them the email, you want to also keep a record. So for instance, it generates something like this. And the reason why we're just doing numbers and also letters is because sometimes when you add special characters, it can trip Airtable, and then the Airtable post request or patch request can have an error. So this is how we do the Airtable patch request. What we did was just to copy the URL that is here. So this is where is update. So we are copying this URL here. That is what we are going to put in here. But as you know, I usually put the variables inside various, so like this one. So I usually put the variables here. So that's why I put the URL. And then I call that particular URL. So once I call that particular URL, I'm updating it with the pass. So the pass is this particular password. So you have to create a variable called atpass or whichever you want. And then once we update the Airtable with that pass, this one, the next thing to do is that you want to now post that pass, right? So you want to post it as an email. So to which email? To this email. So we are doing a make.com. So this is a make.com webhook that I have. So this is this particular webhook, this one. And what we are doing is we are just sending an email to the person that this is your password. Get onto the chatbot and consult or do your come and engage with the content. So this is the email that we send in, and this is the OTP that is going to come from this. So I think this is quite pretty clear. You could use an HTML to do that, to make it a bit stylish. So let's try and go through this particular flow where we do a payment, we confirm, and then once after that we would see what happens in the next flow. So let's start the whole flow to see where we are. So let's say I have a discount code. I have 60% off. And we click on generate invoice. So let's see what happens in the table. So the first one comes, the automation is being initiated. It now generates the invoice. And then Voiceflow is able to get the URL here. And then we know that this is the URL. Right, so let's see here. let's see this particular, what happens here after it's been paid. So I'm just going on the side to make a quick payment. So here the Stripe that is watching has populated here with paid. So the next thing is that since we know it's been paid, we now are going to say, yes, have we paid or not? And we can see that at this particular point, we are here in the flow. And then in the flow, what we are getting is the paid, whether it's been paid or not. So you can see that since it's been paid, you can see the JavaScript generated that 9 character and then filled it up. So this is the JavaScript 80 does that, and then it sends the email to, so this is the email that it sends, this one. So this is the email, right? So this is the, so let's copy this as a customer, and then if indeed they have paid, then they should enter that to continue the flow. So we can see here that they have been verified, right? So what we are saying is that the extracted email from the zero bounce must be the same email in the airtable, and also the user pass, that is the password that I just entered here, must be the same pass from the airtable, and also the airtable should have the word paid, because imagine if somebody has done the consult or has gone through the flow, they've already paid. You want to be able to make sure that they can't just come back anytime because they have paid, because they have used the service and that service has expired. So we have another condition here where AT could be expired. So the question is, how did this become expired? So we can see that the person has gone through the flow, gotten their service, and then they are done. So if they come back to the flow and they say they have paid, then we can check it here, and then this will tell them that it's expired. So we make this condition here that expired. So I guess you understand what I mean. So the next thing is that we want to also, so this expired was generated because we did an API call to the airtable. So this is an airtable patch, and then we sent the word expired to that particular row because we know the Stripe ID. We know the airtable ID. We know this ID here. So we filtered it by the ID, and then we pasted this here, or we patch it here. So guys, this is what I wanted to present. In a case you have a situation where the person comes back that they have paid, all that you need to really check is the email and also this particular password, and I think they should be verified. You can add other things like you want them to tell the invoice number or something. You can check all that, and hope this was helpful. Yeah.